everybody, Walter Crosby with Helix Sales Development, your host of Sales and Cigars. Today's guest is Melanie French. I've known Melanie for a few years now. We kind of colleagues kind of work in the same space. She does things a little with a different flair and a different focus, super competent. But we talk about one of those hot buttons that every entrepreneur, every sales leader is looking for insights on and ideas. So if you have any questions or any thoughts or concerns around accountability with your sales team, accountability. Some of you have more struggles than others. Some of you can't spell accountability. So we talk about it, we give you ideas, we give you some tips. So go grab a cigar, grab a cocktail, and strap in for another fun episode of Sales and Cigars. Thanks. Melanie, thanks for taking some time to jump on the podcast and have a conversation. Been looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me.
How long have we known each other?
Probably about 5 years. That was about the time I think I started out with Sales QB and we got introduced through that.
And then we sort of stayed in and out of connection, and then a mutual friend connected us again. So,
Yep.
This is good. So there's a question I like to ask every guest. Is there a book that you reread on a regular basis or that you gift often to other professionals?
The one that I try to read it once a year, is Who Moved My Cheese?
That's a good one. That's a good one.
So,
What are you reminded of when you reread that one? Like what's the one thing that pops in your head? Because when I reread a book, there's usually one thing that's like, oh shit, I should have remembered.
it's my reminder every year to just embrace change and remember that things are always evolving and that you have to always be adapting and growing or you're going to get left behind.
And it's trying to get clients to understand that for them to get different results, they need to do something differently. Those are all kind of connected, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Usually I find that they've been doing things the same way and expecting different results, right? The definition of insanity.
But then when you tell them that up front, and they're like, yeah, we're ready, and then they push back on everything you tell them they need to do. It's you waste about 30 days of time for them pushing back on what they know they need to do. So that's a book that I probably should give out to everybody when I start out.
It's a quick, short read, so there's no excuse for not getting it in. You can probably read it in a 90-minute plane ride. I
Yeah.
used to always take it when I would travel back in my corporate days. So
Well, that's a good segue. So talk a little bit about why you're doing what you're doing now and how you got here.
yeah, absolutely. So I started my business, French Sales Solutions, about just under 5 years ago, 4.5 years ago, in the middle of COVID, believe it or not. And I had been with a company that I started with right out of college, and that company grew a ton while I was there. I grew essentially with it and had a lot of opportunity, both in individual contributor sales and in leadership related to sales, all the way up through VP of sales with that company. And as we were purchased by a private equity firm at one point, and I just things shifted significantly culturally, and I just got a little disillusioned with where things were going, and just didn't see myself in that space or in that company any longer. And I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with the next step in my career and in my life. And I, started doing a lot of research, soul searching, and ultimately landed on starting my own business and launching as a fractional sales leader and jumping into starting my business via that service
Which
offering.
which is like and you've been doing this for 5 years. So at this point, I would imagine you're like me, where you're unemployable at this point. You just couldn't go work for somebody.
I get asked that question often. Actually, one of the clients that I just signed on asked me that. He's like, "What do you want, long term or whatever?" And one of the things that actually was interesting or to him about or he liked about me was that I actually told him like I have no interest in a job. I'm not here to take anyone's job. I'm not here to like I'm not going to work for anyone full time. Like that I
Right.
don't think you could pay me enough money to to make it worth what would I would have to give up in terms of
Right.
optionality, flexibility, money, even I mean all of it is all intertwined and there's yeah, you couldn't
Yeah.
there's no way.
I mean, it just philosophically in my brain, I couldn't do it anymore. Um, but my response when I get asked that is one of two things, and I'm more of a dick than you are, so it's probably, um, it's probably inappropriate. But it's like, what you can't afford me.
I have that comment too. I would tell people that you couldn't pay me and you wouldn't be able to pay me enough to do it. And you'd probably want to fire me.
Yeah. Um, and the other thing is, it starts with a jet.
A jet?
Yeah, that usually discourages them right there because just I sound unreasonable. If I'm going to go work for a corporation, I'm going to have to put up with a bunch of stuff. It doesn't have to be a big jet. It could be a little one. Um, I just, to me, that's how, like, when I reach the level of I can just buy a jet and fly private, that's to me the level I'm trying to get to. I'm not sure I'm going to get there, but that's what I want. Um, so
Gotta have goals.
it's a goal, um, and ultimately to be able to fly it. Um,
Ooh, okay.
so So you had the corporate gig, and private equity comes in, changes the culture, changes the dynamic. You love the space. You love being in sales. You love working with salespeople. The challenges, the excitement, all of that. So you go start your own practice, and that evolves over time based on what you really decide you really want to do. Right? I mean,
Yep.
that's kind of happened in my world. We've sort of run probably parallel, like, oh, I really like doing this more than I like doing that. And then you just kind of migrate away from the whole fractional piece and start doing more development work and getting people set up and working on the infrastructure. And I mean, that's what I'm doing. I'm not sure that's how you're looking at it, but it,
Yeah, we're pretty similar in that respect, I would say.
yeah, except for the horse part. I'm
Yep.
not big into horses. Um, so one of the things when we were talking about doing this was that there's a few things we could cover and probably talk about for hours, but you have a sort of a pillars of sales evolution that sort of guide your approach, but the idea around accountability. Um, And I think that's always intriguing to a business owner and sales leaders. Like, they all talk about it.
Yeah, they do.
Some of them can spell it. I actually got fired from a client once when I said to the VP of sales in front of the whole sales team, like, you guys keep talking about accountability, but there's nobody in here that can spell accountability. So you stop talking about it and let's start defining what it means. He didn't think that was it wasn't nice, but it was just they were talking in circles for an hour, and you know. So let's start there. Like that, not saying something dumb. I'm sure that's you don't do that, but how do you help somebody create a culture of accountability and knock out that mediocrity component?
Well, the line that I always use or put out there related to accountability is that accountability really lies in having expectations and then having consequences associated with it. So if you're missing one or the other, you're typically going to have challenges with accountability. And so, when that's baseline. And almost every client I walk into, they typically struggle with I'm going to say the consequences part. And usually that is either having any consequences or having what I'm going to call appropriate consequences. So they tend to set expectations that are a bit either too harsh, and then they don't really want, when they actually figure out how that is going to play out in real life, they don't want to execute on the consequences because they didn't really realize what they're getting into when they actually said it. It sounds good. Yeah, it sounds good, like we got to have accountability. Here's the hard line. And then when you actually go and ask people to do that, and then, oh wait, people don't do what you said, then you have to follow up and follow through. And as soon as the problem most I see most often is they hit the edge of the cliff there, and then they want to backtrack because they don't realize that they really have to jump off the cliff, and they don't like what's on the other side of that. And but the problem with not jumping off the cliff is then you set the precedent that you don't actually mean what you say, and there actually are no expectations. So a lot of companies go through that I guess that exercise sometimes more often than not, and
And they
you
lose
know
credibility.
they lose credibility. Yeah, it's a huge problem. So then it's like, well, it doesn't matter what I do or don't do because I'm not going to get in trouble, or there's not going to be any consequence. It doesn't matter
Right.
if
It's
X, Y,
like
or Z.
my father when I was a kid, like, he would tell me to do something. And if you didn't do it, like, don't make me get up out of this chair. Right. And he never got out of the chair once. When I was like 16, I was like, dude, you've never gotten out of the chair. Like, and I started to walk away. He got out of the chair, got my attention. Um, but
You weren't
if you don't,
expecting that.
yeah, but if you don't have that, you lose all credibility with your people. And you said something else I think is really, really critical with accountability is setting expectations that are realistic. But there's another element there, and I'm curious your take. They they really need to be agreed upon,
Mm,
and that agreement needs to be helping that salesperson, because we're talking about salespeople, to know that if they do the three things you need them to do every day, every week, every month, that they will get to that bigger goal that they want. Right. So if they have
yeah,
the
agreed.
expectation and that expectation is tied to that big goal, like they want to buy a boat or they want to buy a house or a cottage or a couple of horses, right? Whatever
Yep.
that is. So then you can, like, there's the carrot, and now you have some leverage with that person. Is that? I mean, how does that? Am I full of shit? Does that
No,
make?
I agree with that, and I would layer onto that. I think the other thing that, like, the salesperson does have to have buy-in to it to some degree. I mean, there's definitely a minimum level of expectation that should exist. But beyond that, there's also an individualistic version of it. I think to what you're describing, to really try to tap into what's going to motivate that person individually to want to get to whatever their goal is. I think sometimes salespeople look at, I'm going to just, like, if let's just take like number of phone calls for instance. Anybody can pick up the phone and dial the phone 50 times, right? Now, whether or not they did the work with the right intent, I always say, with what's the intention behind the activity. If you're doing the thing just to make a number appear on a report that you check did something, that's, to me, that's not
Wasted.
really doing it with it's not the right spirit behind it, right? The whole point of the activity is to predict a future result. If you want the future result, you'll do the activity, but you have to do the activity with the right intention behind it, and an effort, not just like, oh look, I dialed the number. The report says I dialed 50 calls yesterday, and that all of a sudden creates their success. That's not accurate either. So
So
I
we
think some of it also is
got to
the
give them the
person
why
behind it.
behind it, right? We got to give them the
Yep.
why. Yeah.
So, and some people aren't bought into that. Like, some people just, like, they don't want, like, I find that sometimes there's, I'm going to call it, inappropriate fits that, need to figure out that maybe sales isn't for them. And that's okay. There's an element of, I don't necessarily care, as you insert accountability, whether somebody quits or they actually elevate and do a better job. Like I just want one of the two. If they decide that they don't want to do the thing and they're going to go do something else, I celebrate that. That's great. Like go do something else, go work for somebody else. If they're not cutting it here. I don't, the goal is not to fire people. The goal is not to, to go down that route. If you need to, you should, but ultimately if you lay the right expectations and have appropriate conversations with people along the way, one of those two things should happen. I call it get or stop sitting on the fence is what I call it. One side or the other. You gotta go one way or the other. I don't care which, but you got to pick one because both are good outcomes for the
Yeah,
the company.
straddling that fence is uncomfortable, and it breeds the wrong sales culture. It creates mediocrity, all of those things. But what's interesting is that there's a level of fear where within the in management or ownership that, well, what am I going to do? What am I going to do if I lose two salespeople? I only have three, and how am I going to get, like that shouldn't be the fear. The fear should be you've got two people on your team that aren't carrying their weight. They're bringing down everybody. They're carrying your business card out there. They're doing an awful job. Like we can go get more salespeople, but that's why we always should be recruiting. It's another note, right? We should always be looking for talent. Um, so having that goal, having to be something that is agreed upon, that it's being reasonable. These are all things that you've identified. So from a management perspective, right? We got sales managers out there or business owners out there who like, well, but they're going to just go do this on their own. No, they need
I
to.
wish everybody wishes.
Right.
There's
Um,
a very slim part of the population that rings true for. A very probably the top 5%, maybe even less than that, like need that
well,
don't
the
need that.
the data we have, it's like 30 years running, and the numbers change 1%, but it's usually 6%.
Oh, I
Never
was close. Okay.
surpasses 6%. What we call elite salespeople, and they still want accountability. They still want somebody to help them stay on track because we all have that, but they welcome it. Um,
Yeah.
and then you have the good salespeople, which is typically another 14% of all salespeople, and they want help, they want coaching, and they're gonna be effective, and they're gonna respond to good management. Um, but it is a pretty, so you got 20% of the people that are going to do 80% of the work, right? Pareto's principle. But you were right. It's 5 or 6%. That's, and those guys and gals are expensive. Um, but what they lack, what you're paying for is going to come back to you in revenue and in that sales manager not having to pull his or her hair out every month
Yeah.
when you have the
Well,
account.
it's interesting those elite and even top performers, most of the time they don't want to work for a company that doesn't have they don't want to go work with crappy people. So
Nope.
like when you think about attracting talent, if you have a bunch of deadbeats and you think you're going to hire a star performer to come in and well, we'll say save the day, I don't know whatever you want to call it,
Sure.
or elevate the team, that's not going to last real long because that person wants to work with people that are also elite. So it doesn't matter. You might pay them a lot of money and you might get them for a while, but if your culture doesn't support their eliteness from holding other people accountable, that's going to be a problem long term from a retention standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely affects the retention, and it they're looking for, those top people are looking for, some competition, right?
Oh
They
yeah.
want somebody else to be challenging um, them for the top spot. They want that push, right? They're thriving for that, and friendly competition, right? We're not, trying to steal business from each other, but You got it. You got it last month, right? You beat me by $2,000 this month. I'm going to get you, right. That's what I'm talking about. That kind of competition.
Absolutely.
And the mediocre salespeople just want to hide in the corner and not be part of those conversations.
100%.
And okay, so and then consistency that that comes from the manager. So like when you're working with a client, how are you helping them, helping their sales manager, or how are you helping them get that consistency going?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I find that's missing is a good set of leading and lagging KPIs. So sometimes they're good at tracking, I mean, sometimes they're good at tracking nothing. Sometimes they're good at tracking like revenue margin type stuff. But I typically find, at least the clients that tend to gravitate towards me, that they haven't really figured out some of that activity stuff and they don't have a lot built out. And so one of the things I want to pull together is really, I want every rep to have a scorecard that is inclusive of leading and lagging indicators. And I want that scorecard ideally run out of a CRM system, like right, it's spitting out the status every day or every day ideally, and giving them and the manager a snapshot of okay, what is going on, where are we at, how are we tracking, and that whole reporting system and those metrics tend to be really lacking, which I think is honestly one of the big drivers of lack of accountability. Like it's difficult to get the data. It's difficult for the managers to to really get a grasp on all the needed information a lot of times in a clear, concise way that doesn't take up a significant amount of their time. So I want a report delivered to them and the salesperson that's detailing that. I call it the scorecard.
Yeah.
Um, and ultimately that's going to drive the conversation, right? They should be meeting depending on the sales rep and the pace of the organization. I mean, at least twice a month, but probably weekly for most people. Usually, at least some sort of touch base, check in, review, in a that's a formalized process or a let's just call it a recurring meeting on the calendar, not a like I'm going to give you a quick call, check in. This is a structured conversation around where are we at, what's going on, you know, what what's off track, why are we off track, how do we get on track, and the quicker you have those conversations, like the sooner you can turn it around. It's when you let it fester for months, I mean, some people years, right? They've got salespeople that have been in organizations for years that have never had that kind of accountability put on them or even reporting to really drive the their actions. And
And there's
so
always pushback on that, right? Well, you're asking me to capture data, and I need to go talk to people. Well, yes, and if the CRM is set up properly, that you do it. You record something once, and you're done, and all the reporting is handled
it's
for you,
done.
and you don't have to create a report. But the idea that you're not making the calls, you're not doing the activities, whatever they happen to be, right? And you're right. Companies aren't measuring the right things. Like I saw a scorecard the other day. It's like, why are you measuring this? Like, what do you get out of that? Well, it's good to know. Okay, but it's not a scorecard that we need to discuss in this meeting. It's like it's useless information. You need the two things that come after that. They're looking in the rearview mirror, and they should be looking out the windshield. Is how I look at it. And that scorecard is really, really important. And if you're doing a weekly check-in, you can be like, hey, this looks like last week you blew your numbers. Like you're really ahead of the game. This week you're on track. This is great, right? And then you can have the other kind of conversation too, where it's like you missed a lot last week, like, and this week you're off track. Like what's going on? How do I help you get back on track? Where are you stuck? And if you wait till the end of the month, now you're looking in the rearview mirror and you wasted another quarter. So it comes around. And there's a reluctance by the sales manager to have those uncomfortable conversations. Is that you
Yeah.
experience? Because
Sometimes it depends on the manager. Like I think there's pressure from leadership now. So like leadership really has to be bought into the accountability. It doesn't work if the top leaders aren't rubber stamping, and even more than rubber stamping, they have to be championing it. And sometimes they don't like it either because they don't want to be put under a microscope. So some of it is that. So I mean, true accountability is for leaders that really want to be a part of the process. It's not like, well, you have to be accountable, but I'm over here like hands off and I'm just gonna go, do my thing. It doesn't work that way because it's the everyone sees that
Yeah, my
and knows you're
friend
not for real.
my friend Rocky phrases it colorfully: "The fish rots from the head." Um, and I mean, it's true. If you're talking about core values and you're talking about accountability as a leader, it doesn't matter if you're CEO or VP of sales or sales manager, and you're not doing the things that you said you were going to do, credibility goes out the window. Why should I do what you're asking me to do when you don't do what you said you were going to do? Um, so we need to take all of those um, excuses away from the team. I'm curious. I mean, we've really laid out a good foundation for accountability. But when it comes to that rep who, it's 2 months in a row that they've missed their revenue number. It's 2 months in a row they haven't done the things that we agreed to do. Where does that consequence, like, what do those consequences start to look like for that? What do we take away? They can't send them to their room. Can't take away their video games. Um, what do you what do you see that works?
For me, I like if we have a month where it's like bad and it's clear, like we've had conversations in one-to-ones where it's, you know, they clearly understand that they are not performing to the level that they need to, but we've not necessarily officially gone to a write-up process or anything. The second month, I tend to want to drop into a very strong conversation around, I go straight to, hey, maybe sales isn't for you.
Oh,
And that,
you go right to the throat. That's good. I like it.
well, because what I ask them, I just say like, hey, sales isn't for, it's a conversation, but I mean, there's a little psychology behind it, but it's really about like some people, like there's a million salespeople out there. Most people aren't cut out for sales, but there's a lot of people in sales that are not cut out for sales. I mean, that's just, I mean, your stats before, right?
The bar is pretty low to get in.
Yeah. So, I mean, and there's not necessarily a lot of credentials involved. So it's one of those professions where I think people get into because they think they can make a lot of money, which is true. You can, but they don't really have the, I'm going to say, the knowledge, will, or skill to make it happen. And so then the question is, where's the issue? Is it truly a knowledge or training gap? Are they actually trying and they just suck? Like, are they doing the things and they're just bad at it? If that's one conversation. So for me, that's somebody you work with. You try to figure out like
100%.
give them training and coaching and then see what happens. I mean, you can't do that forever and you can't hold on to them forever. But if they're putting in the effort and they're just not good, if you
Yep.
can give them some things to work on and they actually do make improvements, that person is worth trying to
Yeah.
develop a little bit,
They're
I
worth the
think.
investment because they're trying.
But if they're just not doing anything, I go pretty quickly to that, hey, like why aren't you doing the activity, right? It's usually some combination of head trash and or fear of making cold calls, fear of whatever, insert item. But it's usually fear of some sort of fear that they have related to that, and they can't move past that and see the vision, see the forest through the trees in terms of like where that actually gets you long term. And so those people, that's really the conversation of like, hey, this sales really, it's not for everybody. That's totally okay. And I really start at that point pushing the conversation around, if this isn't a good fit for you, that's totally okay. I personally try to support people in that transition or whatever. I usually don't get anyone who admits to me immediately that like that's a like that's true, but
Right.
usually that spurs the I'm going to go find another job, and they jump off the fence on the left side instead of the
Sure.
right.
Which we've accomplished,
Which
coached them out.
so I don't, but I don't always have the I'm not always directly involved with the salespeople because I do work with leadership, like sales leaders as well. So where I'm kind of working with the sales leader to help implement pieces of this, and so I don't necessarily have they're not as comfortable going, we'll just say going for the jugular as I am in that instance. But I mean I've been doing this a long time, and I've had a lot of conversations with various salespeople that, some of which are cut out for it and some of which weren't. And I've never had somebody that I don't think I've ever had anyone that I've had that conversation with that has really ended up panning out like long term.
Yeah.
They've always ended up opting out. Now the super lazy, the ones that are, I would say I'm going to call them good people slash I think they're like I would maybe hire them in a different role, or there's an appropriate like place. I like them in like we'll just say I like them as a person, but they just aren't cut out for the role. The people that are, I'm gonna say the leeches, that they'll hang out until you fire them,
Right.
like until like because they just want to collect their paycheck, whatever it is that they're getting on a base or whatnot, and they don't care. Like they just want to hide under the radar and collect the money as long as they can. And you're gonna have those people. Sometimes you have to go out
You amp up the one-on-ones from weekly to 3 times a week,
daily.
5 times a week to you're going to check in with me. Right, right? You make
Yeah,
the deal.
usually those are like, I mean, pips. I don't really love pips. I think I don't like, they don't, usually if I'm going to a pip, they need to be gone. And it's more of HR's way of
Yeah,
formalizing that.
you got to deal with the people. Um, but when I
Yeah.
deliver a PIP, I always go, look, we've got this all mapped out, and if you agree to these activities and you agree to this time frame, I will do whatever it takes to help you. But please don't accept this and say you're going to do it if you're not. So take this home and read it, and really think about it before you say yes or no. And then
Is this really for you?
I make them go away exactly to your point. And then I come back and I can tell immediately that they're committed. I did some soul searching, right? They say all the right things, and then they got to go do it. And then sometimes you get all of their shit put on your desk early in the morning, and you've got your answer, which is great because it saves you a lot of aggravation. And I've probably done 100 pips in my life, and two of them, two of them have developed into producers who were
That's not good odds.
no. It's to your point. I don't like doing them because I don't think they're going to work. Um, but that
Yeah, if you're
sometimes,
that far gone, I would say the vast majority of the time you're not coming back.
yeah,
Like it's just not
yeah. It's a
not.
so I think you shared a bunch of like great ideas for people to think about accountability a little bit differently and how to put it together. Can you share like who your ideal customer, ideal client, like who do you really love working with? So if they've listened to this and they're like, Melanie's got some great ideas, and I fit her profile, like who is that and how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so I love to work with usually 20 to 100 million dollar companies that have some sort of sales leader in place already. So like I'm not coming in to fill your sales leader role. I'm really coming in to help with some of the more structural or operational things related to sales. And so those companies, the people, I'm not there to take anyone's job. I'm there to work with the both the upper leadership, so usually the CEO, sometimes the COO, as well as whoever the sales leaders or various sales leaders. And the sales leaders that are in those organizations tend to be very long tenured people that have grown up with the organization or been there, 10, 15, 20 years. And they're amazing at their industry. They know everything about that company, right? They're experts in all of that. I'm not. I'm never an expert in anyone's company or their industry. That's not really what I do, because most of the time the people that hire me don't need industry expertise or expertise necessarily in their company. I onboard and I learn enough to be very dangerous with what I what I dig out, but the focus is really on a different perspective. What can we do that is different, and what are best practices we can bring into place that we don't have today? And so those sales leaders that have been there for a long time don't necessarily have the exposure to, working with lots of different companies through various challenges, looking at things from a different perspective. They also tend to be very stuck in the day to day running of the business, and they rarely have a chance to get out and kind of take a step back and look at strategically how, like, where are things that we're missing, or what can we be doing differently to elevate the company, 3, 5, 10 years down the road. This is really more about future. I'm not here to fix your sales problem today. If your world is on fire and you're expecting something to be turned around in 30 days or 60 days, I'm not your gal. This is about really long lasting strategic projects and structural things within your organization. Um, and that can mean a lot of different things, but that's really where I excel. So I like to think of myself as a bit more of an architect, for creating sales excellence in a company.
I like it. That's good.
So
And the best way for them to reach out to you?
LinkedIn is probably the best way. If you, I have my LinkedIn page. I'm actually, I have to look at this. I think Melanie French is the name. French Sales Solutions is the company. So you
We'll
can
have
just look up that, and that should get you to me. And then there's links to, you can send me a message on LinkedIn, or I do have a link to if you're interested in having I call it the clarity call, but it's just a quick 15-minute chat to have a little more conversation and figure out if a bigger conversation even makes sense. So um, there's a link to that
we'll
on my
have that in
LinkedIn
the
page
show
as well.
notes. Yeah, we'll have that in the show notes for you to be able to reach out. Tell Melanie you heard her on Sales and Cigars. If you reach out, I've known her for a while. She really is highly competent, and really, when she accepts a client, she's going to put forth all the effort that you would expect, and she's not going to accept somebody that she doesn't feel that is ready for the help. So it's a little discerning on both sides. Um,
Absolutely.
so, last question, Melanie: past or present, any relationship with cigars?
No relationship with cigars.
Um, that's it's not an uncommon response. Um, and I'm not going to ask the question about horses because it's a big rabbit hole. For the audience, is that Melanie is an equestrian. My daughter's an equestrian. We had a conversation scheduled for 15 minutes about a month ago, and I think it lasted an hour and 15 minutes. And most of it was about crazy horse people. So, um, which was fun.
Absolutely.
Um, I mean, I respect horses. I respect what these young women who get on a 2,000 pound animal and make them ride around in a pattern and jump over stuff when they would rather be back in a stall eating something. Um, I respect the fact that the confidence that breeds. I mean, I know personally, my daughter's got a shit ton of confidence, and a lot of it came from her mother, and the other part of it came from riding horses, making them do stuff. So, um, um, but I got to smoke cigars walking around barns and farms outside, not around the people or the animals. It got me to cover up the horse smell.
Yeah. If you've never been to the World Equestrian Center in either Wilmington, Ohio, or Ocala, Florida, you definitely a destination to hit. I know you've been to the one in Wilmington, right? Did you
I've
ever go
been
to Ocala?
I've been to both. Yeah,
Okay, yeah, they're amazing places.
I mean, and the Roberts family is. I tell you a real quick story, Melanie. You appreciate this. One of one of my daughter's friends who rode in the same barn. We're at the World Equestrian Center, and she was doing a jumper um, class, and she fell and snapped her knee. snapped her leg. I mean, really badly, surgery. Um, and she was taken out in an ambulance, and she's fine. She's riding horses again. But the next day, they stopped by. Mr. Roberts stopped by. I heard she fell. Where is she? Well, she's actually walking back. So he waited and talked to her for about 10 minutes to make sure she was okay, if there was anything she needed. And it was real. He really cared. So there's some weird people in the world, the horse world, but that really,
That's an understatement, by the way.
yeah. But I was really impressed with him taking the time to come by, and then the manager came by a couple more times, just to check in. And it wasn't about liability because that's all waived, right? You sign all those papers. It was legitimately concerned. It's kind of cool. So, well, we won't get into the crazy part because
We don't have enough time for that.
I don't think we do. No, we don't. Just in your own case of horses that you keep buying because one's hurt. Anyway, I really appreciate, yeah, I really appreciate you taking this time. And folks out there, if you fit that profile and you really want some help, give Melanie a call. Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.